You're listening to Where We Are this week. Melissa and I will be discussing President Biden's big announcement, long-awaited announcement around student loan debt forgiveness. We'll break it down. We'll bring you the range of perspectives out there. We'll talk about the Christian response and share our ideas as well. Thanks for listening to Where We Are. This is Where We Are. We are the Wheres. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
And Melissa, it's been a fun week as we've just wrapped up our first full week of partnership with the That Sounds Fun Network. So grateful for them, their team, to Annie for their partnership, and grateful to you, listeners. What a launch week, Melissa. We charted.
Yeah.
We hit the charts
On Apple, yeah.
on Apple, and it's been so much fun to hear from folks who have been tuning in, both to listen to our last week's episode of Where We Are, and then also to the Morning Five throughout the week. It's been great doing that for y'all, and we have a big topic to discuss on the episode today, but Melissa, any thoughts on sort of the last week and That Sounds Fun and how that's been going?
It's been great to hear from supporters, listeners, subscribers coming over from Substack, just welcoming us back because we went on a 4-week break while we were building up this partnership and preparing for it. So hello to everybody who's been here a long time. Hello to any new listeners. Welcome. We hope you like it here. I've been just so excited about the response that we've been given. Yeah,
it's going to be cool to grow from here. We're revving up for the midterms, and it's been encouraging to hear just that even just over the last week, that what we've provided has been helpful to you all. Grateful for the new subscribers at the Substack. And, you know, it really, as we sort of expand this partnership, as we get deeper into the podcast, we're finding all kinds of ways to make sure the Substack complements the podcast and the other way around. So for those that do want to sign up for the Substack, get the full experience, you can do so at reclaiminghope.substack.com. It's a great way to becoming a paid subscriber is a great way to support all of the work we do across the podcast and across the newsletter. Melissa, we've done an episode on the student loan debate, and maybe we'll talk a bit about, that episode, which I think is episode 18. That episode, covers our personal opinions, and we sort of record that episode as some of the Biden White House deliberations were in the news. But of course, we didn't have what the actual policy would be at that point. And
it was all hypothetical.
It was all hypothetical. And so I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about our personal opinions about this, what we're excited about, what reservations might be. This episode will be a bit different from that previous episode as again, we actually have the policy out. We have something to report here. And so let me just break down briefly what President Biden announced this week. The basic background here is that, there's been a long pause on repayment for federal student loans due to COVID. That pause has been extended multiple times by the Biden administration, but there was a sense that sort of it could only be extended so many times. Although there were some people who said, "Hey, you could extend this long. Why don't you permanently a permanent pause?" But there was a sense the Biden administration was going to unpause repayment, and Biden made promises during the campaign around some level of forgiveness, of a cancellation of at least a portion of student loan debt. There were a lot of debates within the Democratic Party. People like Senator Elizabeth Warren, the NAACP, others, principally on the left, although interestingly, you had someone like Senator Schumer really take up the cause as well. Were pushing Biden for much more than his campaign promise. The 50,000 number was a common number that you'd hear. The desire to cancel student loan debt up to $50,000 for borrowers. Well, this week, President Biden announced really a three-pronged policy. First, most simply, the student loan pause, they announced, will be extended one final time through the end of the year, and then repayment will start in 2023. So that's one. Number two, President Biden announced the forgiveness of debt of $10,000 for every borrower of federal student loans of up to $10,000, so long as you have an income of less than $125,000, $250,000 if you're married, filed jointly, or head of household. And then, interestingly, this was not sort of expected in the same way as the $10,000. A bit of curveball is not the right word, but a bit of a little sort of twist or something additional. $20,000 if you went to college on Pell Grants. So for borrowers who receive Pell Grants, you can get up to $20,000 forgiven. And so that's number two. So they extended the pause one last time through the end of the year. They announced the cancellation of $10,000, $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients. The third, which we're not going to be able to give sort of all the details here, but basically the Biden administration rolled out some changes to the income-based repayment plans. So currently, the income-based repayment plans were at 10% of income. They are having that to 5%. The Biden administration is also, the federal government will cover interest above your the monthly payment of those on the income-based plan, so that interest won't grow. Melissa, and we'll maybe talk about this a bit more. It's this policy, the income-based repayment changes, I think have the ability to be, over the long haul, far more significant than these one-time debt cancellation rules, particularly for those who are low income-based repayment. It's the value increases. I mean, it's progressive program in the sense that the value increases the lower your income is. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk more about that. But before, Melissa, I asked for your sort of reactions to this. Let's talk about some other folks' reactions. First, Senator Elizabeth Warren released a statement that today is a day of joy and relief. She said, President Biden is canceling up to $20,000 of federal student debt for as many as 43 million Americans, a powerful step to help rebuild the middle class. This will be transformative for the lives of working people all across the country. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, released a statement saying that President Biden's student loan socialism is a slap in the face to every family who sacrificed to save for college. He continued to say that the policy was astonishingly unfair. The median American with student loans already has a significantly higher income than the median American overall. He closed by saying this is the one consistent thread that connects Democrats' policies, taking money and purchasing power away from working families and redistributing it to their favored friends. And so that was the Republican response. It was interesting to see pushback from some surprising places. I mean, I think one group, Melissa, of Democrats, or those typically considered to be sort of center-left, are some Democrats in tough re-election races. Mm-hmm. So we saw Tim Ryan, who's running for Senate in Ohio, distance himself from the plan. We saw Senator Michael Bennet make an argument against some aspects of the plan. Senator Bennet thought it should be targeted more narrowly. So that's one group. Second, you have the Washington Post editorial board, among others, call Biden's announcement a regressive, expensive mistake. And the editorial board lays out an argument against Biden's announcement, saying that it will not do enough to help the most vulnerable Americans. It will, however, provide a windfall for those who don't need it, with American taxpayers footing the bill. And then the third was one of the most prolific sort of economic critiques came from Jason Furman, who was President Biden's, the head of the Council on Economic Advisors under President Obama. And Jason Furman tweeted that pouring roughly $500 billion of gasoline on the inflationary fire that is already burning is reckless, doing it while going well beyond one campaign promise, $10,000 of student loan relief, and breaking another, all proposals paid for, is even worse. And he continued to lay that out. Finally, I'll say the NAACP, which was one of the most vocal, sort of persistent advocates for not just what Biden announced, but actually asking for more, grabbed hold of the $20,000 commitment, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But grabbed hold of the $20,000 commitment for Pell Grant recipients, claimed sort of credit for pushing President Biden to exceed 10,000, bringing us closer to 50,000 and beyond. And then NAACP committed to continue to advocate for equitable relief for the millions of borrowers who are caught in the student debt crisis. So that's some of the range of responses. Obviously, the Biden White House is, from a policy level, looking at all of the people that their policy announcement is going to help, assuming it's implemented. Let's put a pin in that. And then from a political perspective, there's a hope, and part of the promise that was made to them from people like Stacey Abrams was that taking bold action here would be key for motivating voters in the midterms. The White House has been very clear to say this policy decision was not dictated by political considerations, while saying, but we expect for there to be some benefit some political benefit as well. Melissa, I have a lot of thoughts about sort of all of this. We haven't talked about the Christian response yet. We'll get to that. But I have a lot of thoughts about this. Would love to hear how you've been thinking about and processing this announcement. You're on the record being very supportive of aggressive student loan debt forgiveness cancellation policies. What was it like seeing it actually announced this week?
I felt more like the NAACP when I saw the $20,000 Pell Grant relief. I thought, okay, that's more where I sit, because again, Michael's just mentioned, I'm for whole hog student loan debt relief. I'm for canceling all 1.7 trillion, because if you're going to be taking the step to do a little and take all of this fire, you might as well do the whole thing. And then while taking care of that, asking Congress to actually take action on the high cost of higher education institutions. And I mean, where to even start? If we're going to start there on the high costs of higher education and some of the negative externalities that will come out of this decision, which Matt Brunig covers quite well in his most recent piece on especially this income-based repayment plan being capped at 5% of income, basically halved from the former 10% of income. And zero interest, he says this will encourage universities that they can just start increasing the costs of education, because essentially a lot of people will begin to qualify for this type of program and will be able to, afford their 5%, and colleges will be able to go, sort of rampant on their prices as they have been for a good, 30, 40 years now. So, I'm sympathetic to arguments like that for sure, because the thing missing here, and it's mentioned a little bit in the White House fact sheet about how they're going to hold higher education accountable. I don't see any details there. I will be waiting to see if there are any further details from the Department of Education. But it shouldn't just be coming from the Department of Education. The White House should have said, okay, Congress, now it's your turn. We need legislation targeting this and put it into law, because, executive orders can't actually cover that area of policy. And there, obviously, we will discuss this on the pod a little bit. We don't even know technically if legal-wise this entire plan will be able to go through. So I'll bring those few points up. I'll bring up the point that I looked at. So there's some Goldman Sachs economists. There are some Bank of America economists. So more on the Wall Street side, the finance economists, which are different from like a Jason Furman type economist or Joseph Stiglitz or Larry Summers, who sit more in like the policy realm. These, Wall Street economists were saying they really cannot foresee that this particular policy, which would relieve around, 400 or 500 billion of debt, would actually increase inflation more than 0.1%.
And part of what they're saying is that sort of the inflationary effects of the forgiveness will be offset by the return of repayment.
Yes, because
of loan.
So many people will still be repaying loans, because for many the 10,000 will only cover a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth of their current loans. The restarting of payments will mean that people will have that burden on their checkbook again, and will tamp down consumer buying, which that's the whole point of other, like a Jason Furman type or a Larry Summers type, who are saying, this kind of relief is terrible during a time of super high, record high inflation, is that, we want to tamp down demand. We want to tamp down spending, because if you suddenly are relieving people of this amount of money, they will have more money in their pockets to therefore go out and spend, when we actually don't need people spending right now. The more people spend, the higher inflation goes, or the more it revs up again, because it's been cooling a little bit recently. And for somebody like Larry Summers saying that, the man who basically predicted our entire inflation predicament, I do take what he says now very seriously. I mean, I always did before. I would have deep respect for the man, but he's the main whistleblower on, we're going to have inflation, and then he was completely and utterly right. So when I hear him say that, I am a bit cautious about listening entirely to like a Bank of America or a Goldman Sachs economist. So I want to say that as well, just going more towards the economists who don't think that this is going to actually put much inflationary pressure on the U.S. and therefore the global financial system in economies.
Yeah. So
Where do you want to start with that?
So let me jump. So I am very glad and deeply supportive for the relief that this will provide so many Americans, so many American families, and I'm glad for that. I think we're going to hear stories of lives changing and family trajectories changing as a result of this, right?
And with the new income-based repayment plan, putting it down to 5% and plus the zero interest, because that policy before this, and obviously it hasn't been enacted yet. We have to be very careful about how we're talking about this technically.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Yeah, but the fact that people will actually pay based on their income and they won't have interest compounding again and again and again, because the amount of people that I know in my life who say, oh, I borrowed $20,000 and I've been on the income-based repayment plan for 12 years and now I owe $33,000 off of the $20,000. It's unbelievable. It's such a predatory, horrific system.
Yes.
That this policy, it got better, which I hear Matt Brunig's arguments completely, which is for me, a separate policy measure, which is higher education costs, which absolutely 110% need to be addressed. But I do get the day-to-day people who need income-based repayments finally getting a policy where it actually matters. It will work the way it should.
Yeah, but so I do think that I think the question is if this leads to such bloating on the higher ed side, that will at some point become untenable. And
Absolutely.
And then who pays the piper for that?
Yes, and because, with the way that I just said it, it's just so difficult to talk about this stuff sometimes when you're trying to talk about the sort of thrust or ethos behind a policy can be wonderful.
Right.
While the blowback, the unintended consequences, and sometimes intended consequences, and meaning that that it's probably going to happen. And you try to plan for it, but you know that you can't mitigate it that well.
Yep.
There's a difference when you're talking about these things about what is good and rational policy and how it will actually work in the real world.
And well intended. I think that's absolutely key, and I hope listeners will be returning to that when we talk about some of the Christian response to this over the week. I do want to say a couple other points. One, the legal grounding and for the authority for this action, particularly the cancellation, is weak, ranging somewhere from weak to laughable.
Why do you say that?
Because the authority for the cancellation was grounded in a 9/11 era act.
Yep.
That basically binasing the legal authority that they're grounding this in is an emergency-based one based on COVID. So they're saying we had to, this cancellation is in response to COVID, which is tenuous.
Yes.
There's also just not a ton of precedent, to my knowledge,
that's the part I'm worried
the
about.
executive without legislation, basically revising agreements that that people entered into, and for giving half a $1 trillion in student loans. There is someone shared on Twitter their thought that the ideal situation for the Biden White House would be that they make this announcement, but it gets the court strikes it down. So Josh Barrow tweeted, "The ideal outcome for the White House politically is to issue this ambitious order and then have the court strike it down. He tried, not his fault, further boosts progressive outrage at the courts, and they don't have to do the inflationary stimulus." I can't begin to describe how much I despise this tweet and the thinking behind it. This idea that it would be such smart politics if the Biden administration waived $10,000 to $20,000 of loan forgiveness in front of low-income individuals' faces, knowing it would be struck down, so that they could take that as an argument against Republicans for what? Like appointing the wrong judges, for not being willing to do this through legislation. I mean, it's just like
that's how anemic our politics
it's
is.
like a sick argument on so many levels. And I just, I think on both the substance and the politics, the Biden administration better hope this doesn't get struck down. You don't put something as direct and understandable and as core to the needs that people and families have. You don't put this in front of people and say this is happening if it's not going to happen. And frankly, like the Biden administration, if that's where this goes, like there has to be a cost to pay for that. I'm down. So right, we don't need to get into the weeds here. There's a huge sort of legal argument about sort of who would have the standing to actually bring this in front of the court. But I did want to respond to that idea. Yes. I think the other way that this falls through, though, is there are concerns from career staff at the Department of Education that they don't have the manpower to process this. So basically, there are firewalls between government agencies. And Melissa, obviously, I know that you know this, but for listeners who may not, there are firewalls between government agencies. So the Department of Education doesn't have automatic access to the tax returns of all of all of their debtors, and so that information will have to be collected. Like there will be an application process. Now, the Department of Education does have access to some individuals' income through FAFSA or through other programs, but they don't have direct access to tax return, so that'll have to get worked out. That has to get processed by people, and that's like a whole process that has to be. And so
and with an IRS that's already struggling.
So you really do have to so maybe this doesn't get struck down, but you can also see like repayment starts in the beginning of 2023. What do the people do who have $10,000 or $20,000 or less on their student loans, aren't expecting to have to pay, but are now getting notices that they have to start repayment because their cancellation hasn't been processed yet? Now, maybe this doesn't happen, but I do just want to flag now, there's a lot of bureaucratic work that needs to be done between now and actually processing this cancellation. So yeah, I think those are some key aspects to this. I do think, and maybe, so I want, Melissa, like your response to that, and then I also sort of want to move to the Christian response that we've seen play out. I do think like it's a reasonable critique to say, I think this policy should have been targeted more narrowly. This is what, I mean, this isn't just this is one of the ways in which polarization is working, which is that you have people saying crazy things that if the shoe was on the other foot, they'd be making the similar argument. Like it's not just Republicans who are saying this benefit is going to folks who don't need it. I mean, it's just a purely factual thing, which is the White House set a limit at $125,000 income, $250,000 for married. That could be $100,000, or it could be $75,000, $150,000 for married couple. Like that's a policy decision that could be made. Now, I think that there are some political reasons why the White House has the policy where it is. One of which, Melissa, which is what we've been talking about, which is that I actually think the most significant thing that they rolled out is the income-based repayment changes.
Yep.
And when people understand, the Pell Grant edition does target additional benefit on top of the $10,000 towards lower income brackets, but then the income-based repayment plan is inherently progressive. It benefits those who earn less more.
Yep.
Once folks really process what that means, the political benefit of the $10,000 being made available to the vast, vast, vast majority of borrowers is going to make everyone feel like they benefited somewhat in response to the Biden administration's plans.
Yep.
So I think the way that this actually works out is because of the income-based repayment plan. I think that this ends up being more progressive. The full slate of announcements ends up being more progressive, benefiting lower income folks, leading to reducing economic inequality far more than just the $10,000. And it's actually the $10,000 which is like this shiny object that A, is attracting most of the attention now, but B, will allow people to say, well, yes, these benefits are going to lower income folks, but I got a $10,000 cancellation out of it anyways. I think that's from a political perspective, could end up being a very sort of that could play out very well for the Biden administration.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you that the income-based repayment plan change we think will end up being the most clutch of the policy changes. Besides the we haven't mentioned it yet, but the public service loan forgiveness program is also being improved because it's been notorious. Michael and I were actually at the bill signing for that particular piece of legislation, which was incredible. Back in 2007, we were there. But since 2007, it's notoriously been very difficult as a public servant to get your debt forgiven.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're trying to make changes so that it's not as difficult anymore for your average teacher or, government worker, name it. One of the last things that I just want to say, as I've been noticing just on this sort of side of the analysis in the media, with economists, with others, with policymakers and their reactions to everything feels like, especially when we're talking about the progressive versus regressive type arguments, it feels like everything, and this is okay, like I completely get this. It seems like all of the analysis is completely in the short term, maybe to medium term with like 2023 to 2024 with inflation especially. I'm not really seeing any long-term arguments, which is fine. Again, the short term is deeply important at a time of an absolute wild amount of inflation, at a time when we might be going into a recession still. And you can only predict so far ahead, especially with the American political system, let alone, economics with the business cycles. But I still would have loved to have seen this week a bit more long-term analysis now that we actually have a policy to play with. about what this kind of Plan A does to not just future political decisions as to whomever gets into power next in the presidency versus however our Congress is made up come the November midterms. I kind of want to know more about the the debtors, the people who have the debt, and what this kind of decision does to all kinds of decision making, especially on the social end of things.
Yeah.
Marriage, children, housing, retirement.
Yes,
especially retirement. But also the housing bit, because housing adds all kinds of wealth and assets to a person's name when you buy a house versus renting. What this does to those types of decisions when there's a certain generation right now that holds most of the debt, and that's millennials. And millennials have been in for a little while if you're more into 41, 42, but you could also be younger, like 26, are starting to head into or have been in a while in their highest earning years while also having this kind of debt under their name. There have been a bunch of studies and a bunch of commentary about how little millennials are saving and how little they have towards retirement, where what this kind of decision does towards that end of things, especially when we don't know if Social Security will be around for the millennial generation, for the Gen Z generation in 30 to 50 years, when those generations are able to actually retire at what is now the current retiring age of 65. I would love more analysis towards that end. I want to know if actually the picture would become a little bit more progressive, or I mean, it could become the regressive arguments could still stand really strong.
No,
there.
I think it's a great point.
I would love to know, just because I've been for years now, especially because I am a millennial. B, we've been holders of a lot of student loans. Yeah. So these are things that I think about a lot, and I just have dozens upon dozens, you two friends who are in the same situation, constantly talking about savings, retirement, those types of things, and making different decisions. And obviously people with marriage and children are making decisions based on all other kinds of social issues, but finances is usually a big factor.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point, Melissa. I do just want to name just a couple other factors that hopefully folks will carry into the next segment where we'll talk about the Christian reaction to this. And it's just two other aspects of this that do concern me a bit. One is nothing that President Biden announced can't be overturned or changed by the next president. Yep. So it's all executive, regulatory action. And it's not just a court thing. Just if the next president doesn't like it, they can undo it because it wasn't passed by law. By the way, this is the difference. This is one of the differences between this and bailouts of farmers or the bailouts of the PPP loans. That was legislatively that's legislation. That's congressionally approved funding that was opened up. So I'm concerned, especially when you're talking about loans that have 10, 20-year horizons. Yep. And an income-based repayment plan that is predicated on folks being in it for a decade. So you have folks sort of building their financial decade-long visions of what this looks like. And there is that I'm aware of, no promise the Biden administration can make to them that the deal Biden is offering to them now will still be good 10 years from now. So that would be the first thing I'd say. And then I just say, and this is not anything new in politics or in policy making, I do think there's a certain level of frivolity and happenstance to all of this. Uh-huh. So, if you could have two similarly situated debtors, one of whom, made a financial decision to pay off their loan or got is making less of an income but got a bonus, or they have parents who they have a parent who passed and they got some of the estate money of whatever their parent passed down, and because of these sort of crazy life circumstances that are unpredictable and really have nothing to do with merit's a loaded word right now, and it's loaded for me, but just to use the word, regardless of merit, people are being treated will be treated by this policy in very different ways, and you know what the word I'm looking for is arbitrary. There's an arbitrariness to who's getting the benefits, and how that's allocated. That again is not new. So much of policy is like this because you have to have some standards, and some people will meet it and some people won't for whatever the program is. But I do just want to put that out there that does unsettle me a bit. We're talking about, a direct government payment essentially, and there's a sort of arbitrary nature of the way that this will land on individuals, which I think is a difficult thing to process.
And just to jump in here, because you just sparked something in my mind, and again, this has happened before. It's going to happen again, but just with the intensity around this, in terms of further setting the precedent. It's just so interesting to me to watch senators, congresspeople act in the same way as an advocacy organization would when it comes to lobbying a president to make a decision. So like the NAACP saying the same things as like a Chuck Schumer. That's so interesting to me when Chuck Schumer could go and help try to make a law and actually put these things into actual legal framework. Do you know what I'm saying here?
Yeah, well, so Melissa, this is, we could go down this route.
Sorry.
So part of the reason why you have these, which has a rationality to it, I'm not saying it's irrational, but part of the reason why you saw all the pressure ratcheted up on this, and not, for instance, the child tax credit, which would be more progressive, which would get to poor people and families in a more direct way than this, is because you do need legislation for that. And they at least felt you have an argument, and clearly the Biden administration now agrees, that you don't need Congress, it was just up to the decision of one person. Mm-hmm. So it was... that's another aspect of the arbitrariness of this, which is, this is not, again, I don't want to downplay this. Believe me, personally, I take student loan debt very seriously. It's something our family's wrestled with. But this is, if your goal is helping the least of these, or addressing the worst burdens facing the least fortunate, there are more targeted ways to do that. So, but that kind of leads us into the next segment.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break. When we get back, we both want to talk about how response to this has played out among Christians on social media, in particular. This is Where We Are.
Hide away from me when I need you most. We got love guaranteed, and I have to know. Say,
hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast, or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use, and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing. You can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Well, we're back, and just so you know, you probably heard a clink of a cup during the last segment. Michael was getting extremely Italian on all of us, and his hands were flying while he was talking.
I need a wide, clear radius with my Italian hands, or else plates will go flying.
We moved the cup, don't worry, so that won't happen this time around. But if you're just kind of like, what was that noise? It was a Michael being Italian.
Yeah. So, Melissa, I was struck by much of the reaction I saw on social media in response to Biden's announcement. I mean, I was struck. I mean, maybe even struck isn't the right word. I mean, right, so we saw a lot of the traditional sort of like conservative sort of pushback on the undeserving getting benefits, sort of.
Yeah, or emphasizing, this is going to grow the deficit and like inflation, like
emphasizing this is going to. That's exactly
especially the
right.
deficit. It's because it's
Which those kinds of things. That's politics.
Yeah,
right?
typical. Expecting it.
If Republicans are out of our office, they're going to complain about the deficit. If they're in office spending the money, they're typically not going to complain about the deficit. At least that's been the pattern that we've seen in this century. I did notice, though, particularly from folks who thought that those arguments had purchased not that long ago.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And sort of, frankly, like a lot of like evangelicals who have rejected, because of Trump, have rejected anything Republican. Except for the one thing they haven't rejected from the religious right, from all this stuff that so many of them say they reject, is like the willingness to make a completely unearned, unwarranted doctrinal statements about prudential policy matters. So Melissa, we just spent 40 minutes talking about the pros, the cons, all the unknowns about this. Can the government, is the Department of Education even going to be able to administer this program on a fast enough basis? But you have folks, I think, in reaction to what they deem to be like the mistakes of their past, say things like, the Lord's Prayer requires, if you don't approve of Biden's announcement, you're rejecting the words of the Lord's Prayer because the Lord's Prayer says, forgive us our debts. Gosh, like I don't want to like use the word blasphemy, but I can't think of another word right now.
So folks can go back and listen to this if they'd like to, but I'll also paraphrase it here. The other day with the relaunch of this podcast, we went on Annie Downs' podcast, That Sounds Fun, and we were asked a question that is actually really applicable to this particular moment just days later, about Annie talking about sometimes we have convictions that we hold on to really hard. And, when we're talking to others who disagree with us, often it can feel like the other or you yourself are saying that that person can't be Christian, or you can't be Christian because you hold that conviction. And Michael very clearly, and you've said, Michael, I've heard you say this in a bunch of different arenas about how we can have our theological convictions and we can also have our political convictions. But the second that we sort of take our theological convictions entirely through the authority or the lens, or placing our political convictions above it, and Michael, you can restate this again because I am paraphrasing you. That's when we start running into problems. Again, like you're talking about the ultimate and the penultimate, or the taking the prudential into how would you word it?
Yeah, no. So look, the problem here is folks confusing motivations for supporting a policy with a mandate for others supporting that policy. Mm-hmm. So I think it's I even think it would be a healthy thing to say, look, I think there's a biblical thread of mercy for debtors, particularly those whose debt is unjust. And of course, the flip side to that is there's a moral burden on those who would cast unjust debts on others. And that's a thread that you could find through the Old Testament. You could say that it's something that's resourced by the Lord's, even by the Lord's Prayer. Even if that's not precisely what Jesus is referring to there, that's sort of an ethic that you could draw from it. That's fine, and that thread motivates me to support what Biden has announced. I think that's fine. Although if folks are going to say that, they better believe it. You better not be backfilling your politics with just some lines of scripture. If you're actually motivated by scripture and biblical principles to support this, say that, or argue that if you want to. What crosses the line is to say there's a biblical principle for mercy for debtors. Therefore, you are being unfaithful. You are not being faithful to that biblical principle if you oppose this plan. And there are a lot of reasons why that's wrong. I mean, again, Melissa, we just spent 35 minutes talking about all of the various potential issues, even though I think at the end of the day, I mean, you definitely support it, and I'm kind of like, so long as this passes muster through the courts, which I'm not an expert on, I kind of have to say the burden is on the Biden administration for it having its T's crossed and its I's dotted on the legality of this action. I think the benefits, particularly of cancellation, outweigh the costs. I tend to think the inflationary effects will be balanced out by the repayment. But all of those are prudential matters. Like, I may be wrong. And look, it's a burden to bear your own error when it comes to political decision making. It's a whole other thing to want to take on the burden of bullying everybody else into your position, your prudential position, by laying onto it sort of the veneer of biblical authority. So look, like, here's what we can't say. If there are folks, if there are folks saying, I oppose Biden. I oppose Biden canceling this debt because, people who made the mistake of taking on student loan debt, they should suffer. And if they can't repay it, I hope that they don't deserve to have housing or make a future for themselves. That's just the name of the game. I'd have serious questions for whether that person is pursuing a Christian line of logic. But here's what we're doing, which is we're very eager to sort of throw Bible verses and make all kinds of criticisms of other people, and then puffing ourselves up with, we have the Christian position on this issue. And I'm saying, look, that was not good for the country. It was not good for the faith. It was not good for us as individuals when that was happening under the pretenses and on the terms of the religious right in the 80s and 90s up to today, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not just because the religious right was supporting the wrong policies. It's not that, these tools of religious manipulation, if they're oriented towards the right direction, that makes it good. No, these tools of religious manipulation are inherently wrong.
They're manipulation.
They're inherently destructive. And so just very, very, and I know it may seem like a semantic thing, well, Michael, that's too nuanced to say people should can make an argument about how their faith motivates their position, but can't say that that motivation ought to be binding on everybody else, and anyone who disagrees with them is unfaithful. I don't think that's all that nuanced. If folks feel confident enough to use their platforms to be casting out these kinds of things, they should probably be able to be held accountable to the nuances of what they're saying itself. But it's just not a good look. It's been distressing to see, and I am concerned about folks using some of the same tactics that, and I'll speak directly to our generation, Melissa.
Sure.
Which is using the same tactics that we've seen the harm that they do, mm-hmm. and to make the mistake of thinking that they did harm because they weren't oriented in the right direction.
Yep.
Instead of saying, do you know what? A political victory, a short-term political victory, especially on something that I'm not certain about, right? I mean, frankly, none of the people tweeting about this have spent a day thinking about what it is actually like for the Department of Education to administer a program. Mm-hmm. You know, like
that's right.
Like the folks who've been saying this are not student loan experts. that these are not folks who can't anticipate every unintended consequence of a policy like this, and yet they still feel comfortable making doctrinal statements that are casting burdens on folks' souls about this. And I just want to say, look, be politically involved. Bring your faith into politics. But let's keep first things first. Let's have some humility, and let's understand that you may feel good when you're able to use when you feel you're able to use these tactics against others. But remember the damage these tactics did to your soul and to the souls of those around you and allow that to maybe temper some of the things your folks are willing to say on social media and God forbid to family members and folks that are in your direct circles.
And that's all we have to say about that.
Yeah, I guess so. Look, the encouragement here is that there is a healthy way to bring your faith into politics and assessing these kinds of things, and it's to have your eye on the poor. It's to be careful to think about Scripture, Christian tradition. Think about the needs of your community and bring those with you when you enter into politics. And then when you're there in politics, to point back to the gospel, which transcends, it's not irrelevant to, but transcends the temporal political decisions we have to make, and point to the fact that that there's an ultimate reality, and we are in this sort of intermediate time simply trying to, with our limited knowledge and resources and abilities, simply trying to love our neighbors the best we can in all of life, including politics, stewarding what we have the best that we know how, and with discernment with others and with the Holy Spirit, to do what we think is right, knowing that we may be wrong, and knowing that even the policies that we feel most confident about may have consequences or have effects that are not what we intend, or that what we intend may not be the best thing for people, may not be the best thing for ourselves. And so that's what I'd say. That's what this podcast is about, which is saying that politics is not ultimate, but it is important, and we need to take it seriously, but not take it seriously in the wrong ways. And one of those wrong ways is to every whatever's in the news that week to say that the only way we know how to speak into it is by saying that my way is the Christian way and everybody else needs to get on board most of the time. Dare I say, really all the time, we don't have the authority to make those kinds of statements. All right, folks, thank you for listening. It'll be we're going to see this unfold. We'll keep track of how the Department of Education makes progress on getting ready for repayment to kick in, trying to get confirmation of cancellation for folks who will have their debts, at least a portion of their debts, forgiven. We'll see if there's any movement in the courts, and we'll see how this plays out in the midterm elections. I do think that this is going to be an issue as we head into the thick of the campaign season after Labor Day, and we'll see how the politics breaks down as well. We will be back with you on Monday for the Morning 5, and of course there will be a new episode of Where We Are next week. Until then, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.